The rain came down in sheets, hammering the empty street outside Pamela's house. She had just blown out the last candle in the living room when she heard it, a faint, desperate whimper. Pamela froze. It wasn't the sound of the wind, or a branch scratching the window. It was og. She grabbed her old raincoat and stepped onto the porch. There, at the edge of her gate, sat a skinny brown dog, shivering so hard his collar rattled. Next to him, half hidden under a soaked hoodie, was a man. Pamela's breath caught. He was young, maybe late 20s, his head bowed, rain dripping from his curls. The dog looked up at her with wide, pleading eyes. For a moment, Pamela hesitated. She hadn't let anyone into her home since her husband died 2 years ago. Her neighbor's warnings echoed in her mind. The world isn't safe anymore, Pamela. People will take advantage of you. But then the dog whimpered again, louder this time, almost as if begging. Pamela's chest tightened. She unlocked the gate. "Come inside," she said, her voice trembling against the storm. The man slowly raised his head. His eyes were dark, unreadable, but there was something there, something almost haunting. He stood up, tall and dripping wet, and for just a second Pamela wondered if she'd made a mistake. The dog wagged his tail and trotted past her into the warm glow of the porch light. The man followed. Pamela's heart pounded as she closed the gate behind them and locked it. Pamela led them inside, the sound of rain muffled as the door clicked shut. The house suddenly felt smaller, warmer, yes, but also strangely tense. The dog shook himself, spraying water across the hallway. Pamela laughed, despite herself, and grabbed an old towel. "Here, Buddy," she said softly, drying his fur. The dog's tail thumped against the floor, grateful. The man watched her quietly. He still hadn't spoken. Pamela glanced up, suddenly aware of the silence. "You must be freezing," she said, gesturing toward the bathroom. "There are some dry clothes in the laundry room, my late husband's things. You can change while I make some tea." For the first time, the man spoke. His voice was deep but quiet, almost careful. "Thank you," he said. "My name's DeShawn." Pamela nodded, forcing a small smile. "Pamela," she replied. "And this little guy?" DeShawn's expression softened. "Buddy," he said, scratching behind the dog's ear. "He's all I got." Pamela felt something twist in her chest. A young man, alone with nothing but a dog. She turned away before he could see the pity in her eyes. As DeShawn disappeared down the hallway with the clothes, Pamela stood in her kitchen, staring at the kettle as it began to whistle. Why did her hands feel clammy? Why did she have this strange, gnawing feeling that tonight would change everything? Pamela set the steaming cups on the table just as DeShawn returned. He was wearing her late husband's flannel shirt, the sleeves a little too short on his arms. For a second, Pamela's breath hitched. The shirt looked strange on someone else. Buddy settled at DeShawn's feet with a satisfied sigh. Pamela sat opposite him, fingers curled around her mug. So, she began carefully. "Where were you headed tonight?" DeShawn shrugged, staring into the tea as if it held the answer. "Nowhere, really," he said finally. "Been on the streets since last winter. Jobs are hard to get when you've been in trouble before." Pamela felt her stomach tighten. "In trouble?" DeShawn glanced up, his dark eyes catching hers. "Nothing violent," he said quickly. "Just made some bad choices. I'm trying to do better now." Pamela nodded slowly, though her pulse had quickened. The storm outside growled, thunder shaking the windows. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Buddy's ears twitched. The dog sat up suddenly, staring at the front door, a low growl rumbling in his chest. Pamela turned her head. Through the curtains, a shadow moved past the gate, fast to be the wind. "Did you see that?" she whispered. DeShawn was already on his feet. "Stay here," he said, his voice sharp now, nothing like before. Pamela's heart thudded. She watched as he stepped toward the door, the storm roaring around the house, and for the first time that night, she wondered if she had just let danger walk into her home. Pamela stood frozen in the kitchen doorway, her hands gripping the edge of the counter. DeShawn pulled the curtain aside and peered into the darkness. For a long, tense moment, there was only the sound of rain hammering the roof. Then he stepped back and opened the door. "Wait," Pamela called, but he was already outside. Buddy barked once and darted after him. Pamela stood in the doorway, rain blowing against her face. She could just make out DeShawn's silhouette, scanning the yard. A crash echoed from the alley behind her house. DeShawn sprinted toward the sound, vanishing into the storm. Pamela's heart pounded so hard she could barely breathe. Should she call the police? Was there really someone out there, or was this some trick? Minutes passed before DeShawn reappeared, drenched and breathing hard. Buddy trotted happily at his side, tail wagging as if nothing had happened. "It was just a trash can," DeShawn said, stepping back inside. "Wind knocked it over." Pamela exhaled shakily, embarrassed by how tightly she'd been holding her breath. "You didn't have to go out there," she said quietly. DeShawn shrugged, pushing wet curls from his face. "I'm not going to sit around while you worry yourself sick," he said. "You let me in. That means something." Pamela studied him for a moment, surprised by the protectiveness in his tone. For the first time that night, she felt a flicker of safety. Maybe she hadn't made a mistake after all. Buddy padded over and rested his head gently on Pamela's knee. She scratched behind his ears, smiling despite herself. But as she locked the door again and glanced toward the shadowy street outside, a chill ran through her. Something about tonight still didn't feel right, and deep down, she knew this was only the beginning. The storm had passed by morning, leaving the street washed clean and eerily quiet. Pamela stood at the stove, frying eggs, still thinking about the shadow outside. DeShawn appeared in the doorway, Buddy at his heels. He looked different in the daylight, sharper somehow, less vulnerable. "Smells good," he said with a crooked grin. Pamela forced a smile back, trying to ignore the knot in her stomach. They sat at the small kitchen table. Buddy lay between them, his tail lazily thumping. So Pamela said carefully, "What's your plan? Do you have somewhere you're trying to get back to?" DeShawn's grin faded. "Nah," he said, spearing a piece of toast with the fork. "Not much to get back to. Family's not around." Pamela tilted her head. "No brothers, sisters?" He hesitated, just long enough for Pamela to notice. Then he shrugged. Not anyone who'd miss me. A silence settled between them. Pamela took a sip of coffee to hide her unease. DeShawn leaned back in his chair. "You've got a nice place," he said casually. "Must be a lot to take care of by yourself." Pamela stiffened. "Yes, but I manage." He smiled, a slow, unreadable smile, and looked toward the hallway that led to the rest of the house. "Big place like this," he said. "I bet you've got some valuables tucked away." Pamela's hand froze halfway to her cup. Something in his tone made the hairs on her arms stand up. Before she could respond, Buddy sat up suddenly, ears perked, and barked toward the back door. Pamela jumped, nearly spilling her coffee. "What is it?" she whispered. DeShawn's smile faded, and for a split second, Pamela swore she saw something flash in his eyes, annoyance, maybe even anger, before he stood up and strode toward the back door. When DeShawn stepped outside with Buddy, Pamela's heart was already hammering. She hesitated only a moment before slipping down the hallway toward the guest room. His backpack sat by the bed, still damp from last night's storm. Pamela knelt beside it, her fingers trembling. "This is crazy," she told herself. "You're invading his privacy." But something in her gut screamed louder than her conscience. She unzipped the bag. Inside were the usual things: a worn sweatshirt, a half-empty water bottle, a dog leash. Then she found a thick envelope. Pamela's breath caught as she pulled it open. Inside were papers, some creased, some new, and at least a dozen credit card applications. Most were blank. But one had been filled out in her name. Ihr Name Tpuis. She clutched the paper with shaking hands, reading the forged signature at the bottom. It was almost perfect. Almost. The sound of the back door opening jolted her like a gunshot. She stuffed everything back into the bag, yanked the zipper closed, and scrambled to her feet just as DeShawn's footsteps echoed down the hallway. "Everything okay in here?" Pamela spun around, her heart thudding so hard she thought it might give her away. DeShawn stood in the doorway, Buddy sitting obediently at his side, head tilted as if sensing her panic. "Yes," Pamela said quickly, just making sure you had clean towels." DeShawn's eyes lingered on her face, searching for something. Then he smiled, slow, unsettling. "Appreciate it," he sighed softly. But as he walked past her to grab his bag, Pamela noticed the way his hand hovered over the zipper, as if he knew. Pamela's hands were still shaking as she walked back into the kitchen. She set the kettle on the stove, trying to look casual, but her mind was racing. "You need proof," she told herself. "If you go to the police with just a hunch, they won't believe you." When DeShawn went to the bathroom, Pamela snatched her phone from the counter and crept back to the guest room. Her fingers trembled as she unzipped the backpack again, this time slower, quieter. She snapped photos of the credit application, one by one, her breath shallow, pulse loud in her ears. Then, just as she zipped the bag shut, looking for something, Pamela's stomach dropped. DeShawn stood in the doorway, arms crossed, Buddy at his side. His expression was calm to calm. Pamela's voice cracked. I was just making sure the room was tidy." DeShawn stepped closer. "You already said that once," he sighed softly. "Funny how you keep ending up in my room." Pamela's heart pounded. Buddy barked once, the sound sharp in the small space. DeShawn crouched down, scratching the dog behind the ears without breaking eye contact. "You know," he said in a voice almost too gentle, "people do bad things when they're scared. Sometimes they even do things they regret." Pamela swallowed hard. She felt cornered, trapped between the bed and the door. Then DeShawn stood, grabbed the bag, and slung it over his shoulder. "Relax," he said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I'm not gonna hurt you. You let me stay. I'd never forget that." But as he walked past her toward the front door, Pamela noticed he didn't leave the bag behind this time. And for the first time since she'd let him in, she locked the door behind him and kept the key in her pocket. Pamela's fingers shook as she dialed her best friend, Carol. The phone rang once, twice. "Pam, it's early." "I think I made a mistake," Pamela whispered. Her voice was barely audible, as if DeShawn could hear her even though he was gone. "There's this man, DeShawn. I let him stay here. Carol, I think he's stealing from me." There was silence on the other end, then Carol's sharp intake of breath. "Pam, listen to me. Get out of that house. Right now. Call the police." Pamela's throat tightened. "I can't just leave. Carol, his dog is here, and he—" A sound behind her made her spin around. The front door creaked open. DeShawn stood there, soaked from the rain, Buddy trotting in behind him. He smiled, but there was something off about it this time. Pamela ended the call so quickly her phone nearly slipped from her hand. "You talking to someone?" he asked lightly, dropping his bag on the chair. His voice was calm, but his eyes never left her face. Pamela forced a laugh. "Just my friend, checking in." DeShawn nodded slowly. Then, almost casually, he reached into his bag and pulled out 2 cans of soda. "Thought you might want one," he said, setting one on the table. "You've been so tense, you should relax." Pamela hesitated, staring at the can. Something about the way he said it made her skin crawl. DeShawn's smile widened, as if he could read her mind. "Go on," he said softly. "It's just soda." Buddy whimpered, the sound unnervingly human in the quiet kitchen. Pamela's hand hovered over the can, then pulled back. "I'm not thirsty," she said, her voice trembling. DeShawn's expression hardened for the briefest second before snapping back into a grin. "Suit yourself," he said, popping the can open and taking a long sip. Pamela's heart thudded as he drank. Something told her she had just avoided something terrible, but also that this was far from over. Pamela lay awake long after midnight, staring at the ceiling. Every creak of the house made her flinch. In the guest room, she could hear DeShawn moving around, Buddy's claws clicking softly against the floor. At 2 a.m., she finally made up her mind. She grabbed her phone, her purse, and crept toward the front door. Her hand was on the lock when she heard it, going somewhere. Pamela spun around. DeShawn stood in the dark hallway, his silhouette tall and still. Only Buddy's glowing eyes moved, watching her from the floor. I just needed some air," Pamela stammered. DeShawn stepped closer, slow and deliberate. "No, you were leaving," he said softly. "You were going to run." Pamela's pulse roared in her ears. "You need to leave my house," she said, her voice shaking but louder now. I'll call the police." DeShawn's smile was chillingly calm. "You won't," he said, "because you're too scared of what happens if you do." He closed the distance between them in 2 long steps. Before Pamela could react, he grabbed her wrist, not hard enough to bruise, but firm enough to make her drop the keys. "Relax," he said almost gently. "You're shaking like a leaf. Sit down before you hurt yourself." Pamela's knees buckled as he guided her back toward the kitchen. Her mind raced, searching for a way out. DeShawn opened the fridge, pulled out the other can of soda, and set it in front of her. "Drink this," he said. "You'll feel better." Pamela's throat went dry. Her hands stayed frozen in her lap. "Drink it," DeShawn repeated, softer this time, but his eyes had lost all warmth. Buddy whimpered and pawed at Pamela's leg as if he, too, knew something was wrong. Pamela glanced at the back door. It was only 10 feet away. If she could get there before he... DeShawn's hand slammed flat against the table, making her jump. "Now," he said. Pamela's breath came fast and shallow. Her hand crept toward the soda can, not to drink, but to buy herself a second more to think. Buddy let out a sharp bark, startling DeShawn. Pamela seized the moment. She hurled the can across the room. It exploded against the wall with a hiss, spraying soda everywhere. Buddy lunged forward, barking wildly. Pamela shot from her chair, sprinting for the back door. "Pamela!" DeShawn roared. His footsteps thundered behind her. Her fingers fumbled at the lock, slipped, then finally twisted it open. Cold night air rushed in. She made it 2 steps onto the porch before DeShawn grabbed her by the arm and yanked her back inside. Pamela screamed, kicking wildly, her slipper flying off. "Stop fighting me," he shouted, his grip tightening. "You're going to hurt yourself." Pamela clawed at his arm, panic giving her strength. Buddy barked furiously, teeth snapping at DeShawn's leg. DeShawn cursed and shoved Pamela toward the wall. She hit it hard, the breath knocked out of her. For a split second, everything went silent except for the rain hammering outside. Then Pamela's survival instinct kicked in. Her hand closed around the cast iron pan she'd left on the counter earlier that night. She swung. The pan connected with a sickening crack. DeShawn staggered back, clutching the side of his head. Buddy barked even louder, as if urging Pamela to run. Pamela didn't wait. She bolted through the back door, barefoot into the storm, not even feeling the cold mud under her feet. Behind her, she heard DeShawn shout, angry, pained, and Buddy's frantic whining as the door slammed shut. Pamela didn't look back. She ran into the night, her heart pounding, knowing this wasn't over. Pamela pounded on her neighbor's door, her fists slick with rain. "Please," she shouted, her voice breaking. "Open up." Lights flicked on inside. A moment later, the door creaked open, and Mr. Halpern, a grizzled man in his 70s, stared at her in shock. "Pamela, what in God's name? He's in my house," she gasped, clutching the doorframe. "Call the police, please." Mr. Halpern didn't hesitate. He ushered her inside and grabbed the phone. Pamela stood trembling in the entryway, her wet hair plastered to her face. Every second felt like an hour. Her eyes stayed locked on the dark street outside, waiting for DeShawn's silhouette to appear. "Police are on the way," Mr. Halpin said, slamming the phone down. "You're safe now." But Pamela wasn't sure. Buddy was still in the house. Her heart twisted at the thought of leaving him behind, and of what DeShawn might do if the police came. Then, through the rain, she heard it, Buddy's bark, not playful this time, panic. Pamela's blood ran cold. Before Mr. Halpin could stop her, she yanked the door open and ran back into the storm. "Pamela," he called after her. But she was already halfway across the yard, her bare feet splashing through puddles. She reached the back of her house, heart hammering, just in time to see the kitchen door swing shut. DeShawn was still inside, and Buddy was barking like his life depended on it. Pamela crept through the back door, her wet nightgown clinging to her skin. The kitchen was dark now, only the sound of Buddy's frantic barking guiding her. "Buddy," she whispered. The barking stopped. Her heart nearly stopped with it. Then she heard footsteps, slow, heavy, coming from the living room. DeShawn stepped into view, his face half in shadow. He was holding Buddy by the collar, the dog straining to get free. "You just can't stay away, can you?" DeShawn said softly. Rainwater dripped from his hair, streaking down his face. "You had your chance to leave." Pamela's chest tightened. "Let him go, DeShawn. This is between you and me." DeShawn tilted his head, that same eerie calm settling over him. "You think you get to decide how this ends?" Pamela's eyes darted toward the counter. The cast-iron pan still lay where she'd dropped it, but it was too far. Then, faint in the distance, sirens. DeShawn's head snapped toward the window. For the first time, his calm cracked. "You called the cops." He growled. Pamela's fear turned into something else, resolve. "Yes," she said, her voice shaking but loud. "And they're almost here." Buddy growled low, teeth bared. DeShawn's grip on his collar loosened for just a second, and Buddy lunged, sinking his teeth into DeShawn's sleeve. DeShawn cursed and stumbled back. Pamela grabbed the pan. "Get out!" she screamed, lifting it high. For a heartbeat, everything froze. Pamela, the pan raised, DeShawn breathing hard, Buddy snarling. Then the sound of car doors slamming outside broke the spell. Blue lights flashed through the rain-soaked windows. The pounding on the front door shook the whole house. "Police, open up." DeShawn's eyes darted from Pamela to the flashing lights outside. For a split second, she thought he might lunge at her, but then Buddy growled again, low and menacing. DeShawn dropped the dog's collar and raised his hands. "Fine," he hissed. "You win." Pamela didn't lower the pan. She kept it raised until two officers stormed in, shouting commands. "Step away from the woman." One barked, his flashlight beam catching DeShawn's face. DeShawn didn't fight. He just smiled, that strange, cold smile, as they forced him to the ground and cuffed his wrists. "Wasn't gonna hurt her," he muttered. "Not really." Pamela stood frozen, her whole body trembling as the officers led him out into the rain. Buddy pressed against her legs, whining softly. Only then did Pamela drop the pan, her knees buckling. "Mist Hauer, Pio the Brella in Hunt." "It's over," he said gently. But Pamela shook her head, tears mixing with the rain on her face. "No," she whispered. "It's never really over when you let someone like that into your home." She knelt and wrapped her arms around Buddy, burying her face in his wet fur. The dog licked her cheek, tail thumping softly, a small reminder that she wasn't completely alone. As the police cars pulled away, Pamela stood on the porch, barefoot and drenched, watching the red and blue lights disappear into the night. Her house was quiet again, too quiet. Pamela turned back toward the door, her hand tightening on the key in her pocket. Next time, she promised herself, kindness would not blind her to danger. If this story kept you on the edge of your seat, don't let it end here. Hit that like button, subscribe for more dramatic, true-to-life stories. And tell me in the comments, what would you have done if you were Pamela? Your voice might inspire our next story.